breaking news now because Hamas has named its Gaza leader, Yahya Sinwar, as chief of the group following Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran on July the 31st. Ismail Haniyeh, of course, being the leader of the political wing of Hamas. Yahya Sinwar has been the group's leader in Gaza since 2017. Let's speak to Nour Odeh, who's in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nour, Ismail Haniyeh, obviously his death was a huge blow for Hamas. Haniyeh had been involved in political negotiations to bring about an end to the ceasefire. Now that his replacement has been named, Yahya Sinwar, what does this mean for Hamas? What does this mean for hopes of peace? Tell us more.
Well, Yahya Sinwar, let's talk first about the man. This is a 62-year-old man, someone who was imprisoned for, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. He was released from Israeli prison in 2011, and he has skyrocketed to an influential position in Hamas, leading it in Gaza. The choice of Hamas to name him the leader of the movement now puts Gaza front and center of not just the events on the ground, but certainly of the dynamics in the Hamas movement. And it really sends a signal as far as negotiations and ceasefire is concerned. Gaza calls the shots. If you were expecting the assassination to bring in someone who might be more amenable to a solution, more amenable to a ceasefire that is not very favorable, then Hamas now has made its choice, and it has really brought Gaza back to the center and given it as much power as one can imagine. And it's really a choice that very few expected. A lot of contenders, a lot of names were floating around. Yahya Sinwar was not one of them, Sohail.
And Nour, Yahya Sinwar, since at least the beginning of this recent conflict, is a man that has somewhat lived in the shadows in Gaza. To have him now in a prominent role, potentially as a public negotiator, would be a huge step for Yahya Sinwar, given that he has been pretty much targeted by Israel as being somebody that they essentially want to eliminate.
Absolutely. Yahya Sinwar is on the top of the Israel hit list for Hamas leaders. He is someone that is wanted and pursued by the Israelis. But now the shots are in his hands. The decisions will be, he will have the final call. And so it will be interesting to see how Hamas will maneuver this. Any decisions, any negotiations happening outside of Gaza will have to filter through all the hoops that have to be taken in terms of security in order to get to Yahya Sinwar so that he can have the final say. So that might complicate and prolong any negotiation process, but it's also a message to Israel that Hamas is united, that there are no differences, that there won't be any schism between Hamas outside of Gaza and Hamas inside of Gaza. There was a lot of debate on whether the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, a pragmatist, a political leader, would empower or embolden the hardliners. This is a decision that will take a lot to digest, but it also really speaks volumes about the multi-layered and very sophisticated decision-making process in Hamas itself. There is a very, clear process of decision-making in Hamas. There are layers of that, and people take their roles very seriously. They vote on these decisions, and the votes are respected. And so Yahya Sinwar was not named by, he was not imposed. This is a man who now is at the helm of Hamas by the vote of those with him in leadership ranks, many that we know, but many more that we don't know about.
And Nour, what about the response, do you think, from Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, from Fatah, for instance? I mean, are they prepared to get behind a figure like Yahya Sinwar, given his proximity to Hamas's military wing in Gaza?
Well, Fatah finds itself in a very interesting position since the beginning of this war. It has not been able to perform, to rise to the occasion, if you will. That's according to many observers, and many within the Fatah movement have been very critical of the fact that the Fatah movement itself has taken a back seat. It has not been vocal. It has talked about the importance of unity. It has talked about the importance of ending the war. But as a movement, as a long-standing movement in the Palestine national liberation, it hasn't had any prominent role during this war. And so now it can only welcome the election of a new leader for the Hamas movement. How they will deal with that in the coming days and weeks will be very interesting, particularly, as you said, because Yahya Sinwar is being pursued. Their relations will be primarily with the Hamas leaders above ground, outside of the occupied territory, because the leaders here in the West Bank are mostly also been imprisoned by Israel. So they will deal with the Hamas leaders outside of Palestine, knowing full well that the final say will be in Gaza and will be from Yahya Sinwar.
All right, Nour, many thanks for that reminder of the breaking news this hour. Hamas has named the group Gaza leader Yahya Sinwar as its new political chief following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh on July the 31st. Let's bring in Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera senior political analyst. He joins us by Skype from Paris. Marwan, please put this into context for us, because, I mean, how controversial is this appointment of Yahya Sinwar, given that he is, of course, one of Israel's most wanted men?
Well, as you know, on the record, Israel has declared that every Hamas leader is a target. They warned that they will assassinate all of Hamas leaders, whether they are inside or outside. So I'm not sure if that's controversial on that side of it, because Israel was not going to let anyone off the hook after October 7th. But if it's not controversial, then what? To my mind, it's defiance. That's what it is. If the answer to the question what is the day after, well, Hamas just answered it. The day after Gaza, it's Gaza. The day after Gaza, it's Hamas in Gaza. And the day after Gaza, it's Sinwar on the helm of Hamas in Gaza. I think that's the answer that basically Hamas is providing to its own ranks, but also to Israel and the Arab world. If Hamas leaders have had difficulty finding a home for themselves, or finding shelter, or finding a safe place anywhere in the Middle East, well, now it's clear that the top leader is right there somewhere in the tunnels of Gaza resisting. So again, then resistance is the answer. Now, as to your sort of more political question about Sinwar and where he stands, before October 7th, when Israel was blocking all the venues to a diplomatic solution, Sinwar is on the record telling his supporters that Hamas accepts a two-state solution and the return of the refugees. So let's wait and see what Israel does at the time. But of course, Israel does not accept a two-state solution, will not let the refugees back in, and will continue to target Hamas as it has been, in fact. So I think in terms of the consequences, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference for Hamas. In terms of Israel, it will make a big difference now for it to understand that defiance and resistance and steadfastness is the way forward for the Islamic group.
I understand it not making much of a difference for Hamas philosophically, politically, and what the group aspires towards. But as you say, Marwan, he is a man who may well be in the tunnels of Gaza, as opposed to Ismail Haniyeh, who was able to travel here to Qatar, to Iran, to Russia, to China. He's very much been a public figure in the open. How would things work, do we imagine, when it comes to ongoing negotiations with the intermediaries in all of this?
Well, in fact, it was, to a large degree, it was Ismail Haniyeh that was the intermediary, and Israel killed him, right? And the decision was more or less in the hands of those in the tunnels the past several months, and I think it remains so. In as far as envoys and diplomacy and movements around the world and garnering support, I think there are enough of the Hamas, legislative and executive body out there on the outside to be able to do that. But I think, once again, the message is that this is all about resistance, steadfastness at this point in time, rather than more of the, diplomatic acrobatics, if you will, that would probably don't lead to much at this point in time. I think the focus on Gaza and the focus on Sinwar is a major signal of defiance and of the fact that Hamas was not about to lose Gaza and that Hamas is going to remain a power within Gaza, and hence its leader is there.
Interesting, of course, that this comes after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who was in Iran, the guest of the Iranian state, there at the crucial handing over of power to the country's new leader. Iran has promised a response, hasn't it, to that assassination. I wonder whether this, as you say, show of defiance and appointing Yahya Sinwar was directly linked, is directly calibrated to the way in which Ismail Haniyeh died.
Yes, to a large degree. I think it just tells you that Hamas's choices in this region, in the Middle East region, are not easy, and they're not numerous. And in the end of the day, after 7 months of genocide in Gaza, the idea that the leadership needs to be there where the people are suffering, I think it's an interesting decision that I think will be taken not lightly, even by the ranks in Gaza. People are suffering in Gaza, and so is the leadership within Gaza at the helm there with the people resisting the Israeli genocide. Now, Iran, of course, is a bit of a separate question here in terms of its response. I think it will respond. The response will be maybe a one-time or maybe a bit more, but it's going to be limited in time and scope. Israel is more worried about the response coming from Hezbollah, in fact, at this point in time, than it is at the response from Iran. It is almost predictable, unless, of course, Iran surprises us all and carries a whole other qualitative kind of response to the Haniyeh assassination. But I think the entire region now is in a bit of a, well, not exactly nervous breakdown, but it's certainly there at the brink. And everyone is waiting, including the many in Israel, about what's going to happen next. What will be the response, and then what will be the response of Israel to the response of the Iranians and Hezbollah, as well as that of Hamas. Once again, the decision to appoint Sinwar could, be seen as a smack of desperation, but it could also be interpreted as one of steadfastness and heroism and being in touch with the people in Gaza.
If this is indeed, as you say, a message of defiance, then it is one that the United States will have to work out a response to. Of course, Washington says it's engaged in intense diplomacy pretty much around the clock. That's the quote from the White House, at least, to help calm tensions, says the White House. At the same time, the Israeli military says that US CENTCOM commander General Kurilla is in Israel for, quote, joint preparations. It seems like diplomacy on the one hand and military preparations are hand in glove at the moment. And I wonder to what extent the addition of Sinwar into all of that will mean. That's why the only concept that comes to mind, the only metaphor that I have and I've had in the past several months is pyromaniac fireman. The United States, in its support to Israel, in its unconditional support of Israel, arming it, financing it, and shielding it, is definitely leading to further escalation in the region, leading to more death and destruction in Palestine and elsewhere. On the other hand, its attempt at diplomacy and its pressure on various partners and allies in the region, including Egypt and Qatar and others, to try to reach some kind of a ceasefire deal and to build on that towards something larger, is the fireman aspect of the pyromaniac fireman. So it's a bit of a. It's a bit of a, what's the word for that? It's a bit of a puzzle, in a way. And in a sense, leaving it
to Netanyahu to decide what the American policy should be. And basically, Netanyahu has gone rogue the past several weeks and months, not listening to Biden, not listening to the Biden administration, not even accepting any of its advice, rather humiliating it once and again, taking up the assassination of these two main leaders after he returned from Washington, and continuously adding red lines to the negotiations that are happening in Doha and Cairo, as well as basically killing the negotiating partner, Ismail Haniyeh, and all the rest of it, is definitely putting the Americans in a bind. And so Biden, instead of calling Netanyahu and say, wrap it up, Mr. Netanyahu, or otherwise, he's calling, the other allies, including the Qatari Emir, the president of Egypt, and probably others in the region, in order to ramp up support for diplomacy. I'm not sure it's going to be easy for those who were put in a bind by the assassination. They could do much today if Netanyahu continues to add to that.
OK, well, Marwan, just stand by for a moment, because you mentioned that call between Biden and regional leaders. The White House has just released a statement saying US President Joe Biden has had a call with Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. It says they addressed their efforts to de-escalate regional tensions, including through an immediate ceasefire and hostage release deal. President Biden and Sheikh Tamim agreed on the urgency of bringing the process to closure as soon as possible. Both leaders and their teams agreed to remain in close coordination over the coming days. Marwan, what should we read into this call for close coordination between the leader of Qatar, obviously a key mediator, in the hopes of bringing an end to the conflict in Gaza, and Washington?
Well, I'm hoping, there are a few interpretations. I'm hoping that President Biden is lending support to his Arab allies because Netanyahu has been undermining them. Netanyahu has undermined the negotiations in Qatar. Netanyahu has even incited through his various allies against the leaderships in Qatar and other places. Basically, the task of mediating has been thankless. And I really, the Qatari patience is admirable. The steadfastness is admirable in, continuously trying to get this deal done while being continuously undermined by Netanyahu. So hopefully this would be more of an attempt by Biden to support, his Arab allies in this thing. And maybe this will be followed by another call to Netanyahu to say, Mr. Netanyahu, you need to wrap it up. In the process, and as the Qatari Prime Minister said, this is really undermines any attempt at concluding a ceasefire deal when Israel continues to carry assassination of the likes it did, continues to kill Palestinians day in, day out, continues to expand its killing spree to the West Bank, and expand the war now to Lebanon and elsewhere. It's not going to be possible to reach a deal when Netanyahu continuously humiliates everyone, including the Americans, the Egyptians, the Qataris, and everyone else.
All right, Marwan, many thanks for that. Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera senior political analyst. A reminder, of course, of the breaking news this hour that Hamas has announced Yahya Sinwar as head of its new political bureau, replacing Ismail Haniyeh, who, of course, was assassinated in an airstrike in Tehran on July the 31st.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.